Is it possible that flight could be the ultimate definition of adventure? Aviation has been on the leading edge of human exploration for the past century. And despite having explored the skies all the way from Kitty Hawk to outer space, there still remains endless adventures beyond the clouds ahead. The bustling world of high-tech commercial airliners displays the huge leaps in aviation technology available to us today, where the small, more accessible realm of general aviation aircraft provide a catalyst for pilots to experience the adventure of flight, just as the Wright brothers had imagined it would be. Where the two branches meet is the world of corporate aviation, where fast, high-tech jets capable of operating in some of the world's most remote and challenging locations take their passengers countless times a day. At the pinnacle of corporate aviation lies NetJets, a company that offers fractional ownership of business jets. NetJets was originally founded in 1964 as Executive Jet Aviation. It was the first and still is the leading private business jet charter and aircraft management company in the world. NetJets customers, referred to as owners, purchase a share of a particular type of airplane, which they're given access to year-round. In the cockpit of these aircraft are some of the most experienced pilots in the world.
This is one of the very, very few companies in aviation where everybody understands the importance of safety. Everybody breathes it every single day. I view this company as everybody is carrying our families all the time. We're looking at operating every flight with the same safety margins as if our own families were in the back of that aircraft, because that's what our owners expect. I mean, that's what it's about. It's about getting people from A to B safely.
I think of NetJets as my last aviation job. I'm going to retire here. People I work with, they enjoy doing their job. The best trained pilots in the world. When somebody says NetJets, you know the pilots are trained very well.
NetJets excels at a lot of different things, but I would say that the 2 points that rise to the surface most often when I'm speaking with our customers is access and peace of mind.
Corporate jets offer their owners unsurpassed comfort in the air, with an ultra-quiet cabin, advanced safety technology, and luxurious seating. But Mace Pinchal, a NetJets owner for over 16 years, prefers the seats in the front of the plane. Mace has been flying his whole life and jumped at the opportunity to pilot his own aircraft, a privilege only obtained after undergoing extensive and rigorous training side by side with NetJets pilots.
I was really enthused to be able to train with professionals like that, to really immerse yourself into the whole process, to go beyond just knowing the essentials.
Being trained to operate and land an airplane is one thing, but understanding the methodology of how it is to be flown for NetJets with their highest regards for safety is to know the standard operating procedures.
Standard operating procedures allow a corporation that has several pilots, anywhere from 3,000 pilots at NetJets to 9,000 at major airlines, to understand that there's a script here. There's certain things we say at certain times, certain things we do at certain times. So it keeps the amount of surprises and techniques down to a minimum. SOPs are incredibly important, especially in those phases of flight where you don't have a lot of time for a large margin of error.
SOPs are based on safety. Our training, safety, everything is safety. So we don't take chances.
I see these things that are called SOPs, and I told my wife, I said, my God, in addition to having to do a deep dive and all this other stuff, I have to learn a play. And essentially that's what it is. It's a play. There's a programmed response for every situation from each side so that you can readily go from crew to crew to crew, and you're going to know exactly what to expect at a time of flight on call-outs and procedures. And that goes back really to the very foundation of executive jet 50 years ago. We were founded by these giants from the military, guys like LeMay and Stewart and Tibbets. And they designed standard operating procedures back in the early days of the Second World War, because essentially they were getting, these farm boys, and they had to teach them how to fly these complicated machines. So they designed these series of SOPs.
I probably traveled to about 200 total locations in my airline career, whereas a corporate pilot might go in the thousands. And as a result, he's many times going into places he's never seen before, never landed at the airport. And that will give him pause to start thinking about, what do I need to anticipate? What do I need to think ahead about so I can analyze, or what we call in flight safety, our threat and air management? To what extent can I get ahead of the airplane and anticipate all the things that might go wrong? It's kind of a balancing act, I would say, between being prepared and being paranoid. You have to be thinking ahead of the airplane on several levels as a corporate pilot.
You have to be versed on the busy airport and be able to handle the busy airport. And you're going into a small airport, uncontrolled airport, shorter field, nighttime, weather. But then again, if it's too many things are stacked against us, going into a small airport like that, we'll go somewhere else. We don't take the chance.
You don't play the odds. What if we lost that engine at rotation? And given the weather conditions and given the temperature and given the elevation, could they safely clear all the obstacles and get out of there? We consider that.
Terrain, pull up.
We're preparing pilots because they don't see a lot of non-normal emergency situations. It's a rarity now. Our airplanes are so reliable that when I ask a class, how many of you guys have lost an engine? You may have a class with 5,000 to 10,000 hour individual experiences, and maybe one guy in a class of 12 has actually had a major system malfunction. We go beyond just training to these maneuvers, what happens when you lose an engine at takeoff, but we train to the higher order thinking skills. How do you find the pros and cons, the strengths and the weaknesses, and then make a decision? And then after you make a decision, and you try to execute this and you find there's no guidance in the checklist, how do you improvise?
All of that training was to be put to the test when NetJets Europe, a division of the company based in Portugal, needed to take delivery of a brand new Embraer Phenom 300, an aircraft not intended for transatlantic flights due to its limited fuel range and radio capabilities, which were designed for shorter domestic flights. This was a mission that would require years of collective experience and skill by both pilots, experience that Phenom pilots Rick Belda and Mace Pinchal both had under their belts.
First soloed September 30th of 1973. A little Yankee trainer, AA-1A.
I started at a very early age. I used to fly with my dad. My dad flew in the Second World War. And then when I was about 5 years old, one day he decided just to turn into the airport and start taking flying lessons again. So I guess I was his flying buddy. 16, I soloed. 17, got my private.
I've flown a lot of different single-engine aircraft, twin engines. I've flown the Cessna 310, all the 400 Cessna stuff, King Air 200, MU-2, L-1011.
When we started up our business in Texas, I bought a Bonanza, then we bought a Baron, flew the Baron around the world in 92, moved up to a King Air, and I decided that it wasn't a fast enough airplane. So we started looking around for jets.
You know, we'd see a plane flying overhead, and being from Ohio, obviously, Wright brothers from Ohio, a lot of aviation, John Glenn, Neil Armstrong. Not that I had aspirations for any of that, maybe that's where I got the bug a little bit.
To capture the flight, fellow NetJets pilot Jon Schellenger was asked to join the crew. Not only is Jon an experienced aviator, he's also a passionate filmmaker. Jon's production company, Cinematic Motion Pictures, has produced everything from feature films to countless aviation documentaries.
We talk to owners a lot about our commitment to safety, but unless you're a pilot or part of flight operations, the word safety is just an abstraction. So I thought I'd make a film about that commitment, giving viewers a behind-the-scenes look. The adventure of flying here was the perfect vehicle I needed to make the film both informative and entertaining.
Of the large variety of aircraft flown by both Rick and Mace over their careers, none could match the technology, performance, and exclusivity of the Phenom 300.
We've had unbelievable success selling the Phenom 300. We believe it is, without question, the best business jet in the light cabin category, evidenced by the fact that it's been the best-selling aircraft a number of years in a row.
The reception of the Phenom 300 in the NetJets Europe fleet and with the NetJets Europe customers and owners has been just as strong as it has been in the U.S. NetJets Europe has very unique and specific operational requirements for some of the airports that their owners like to frequent, whether they're airports in the mountains or airports with short runways and resort destinations.
London City is a very challenging airport for multiple reasons. It's really that commitment to our owner, making sure that we're not only providing the absolute best aircraft to them, but we're also providing that continual evaluation to make sure that we're always going to provide the best service to them.
We did a lot of analysis around the Phenom to make sure it would be an appropriate airplane for those types of airports, and it's performed fantastically at those airports.
It's probably the most fun jet I've ever flown. It's almost like a little Ferrari. It'll climb directly to 45,000 feet, and it's just a very elegant looking airplane on the ramp.
Designed by Brazilian aircraft manufacturer Embraer and built at their facility in Melbourne, Florida, the Phenom 300 represents the latest in aviation technology and engineering.
Again, it was something new to our owners. We weren't entirely sure how the owners would accept the Phenom at first.
They build a real quality product. They seem committed.
The Phenom's powerful engines and efficient wing design make it perfectly suited to travel in and out of some of the most challenging airports.
The wing on the Phenom is just completely clean, swept, beautiful design, and quality.
The Garmin 3000 is awesome, very intuitive, not difficult to learn, actually very easy, and it gives you a lot of information.
Essentially, our flight control computers that we have up front look like your iPad. And then there's a much higher level of automation.
They're so proud of their product that they want it to be the best it can be.
It's 2010 technology versus 1980s technology.
800 miles north at the Flight Safety Training Facility, located in Columbus, Ohio, Rick and Mace practice and keep their skills current in advanced Phenom 300 simulators and prepare themselves for the challenges of a transatlantic flight.
Being in a classroom with all these professionals, that starts wearing off on you. And you start adapting their habits and you start adopting their approach. It was a really eye-opening experience, and it was a good experience.
Left close traffic through the wind on the left, please take off.
After the plane leaves the factory floor, it undergoes a series of intense inspections, followed by the acceptance flight in collaboration with NetJets.
When we do acceptance of the airplane, we have somebody who goes down to inspect the aircraft. And when I say inspect, they inspect. They have to clear those items that are found first, and then we go do the acceptance flight.
When they think it's ready, one of us goes down and we have our delivery pilots, and we actually fly the plane with their pilots in the right seat. And we go up, there's a whole checklist of things to check, like brakes, how long does it take the engine to start.
The acceptance flight is typically 3 or 4 hours, and what we're trying to accomplish there is go up to a high altitude and cold soak. When you cold soak an airplane, it expands and contracts. some of the interior will change. Until you're able to put the pressure vessel under some sort of pressure and the changes that occur, you don't see the little things that pop out at 43,000 feet. Sometimes it's easy. You go down there, they take a couple items they find, and we go correct them, and then you go do the flight, it's ready to go. Other times, it's 3 weeks later. It's very dynamic. It changes constantly, and you have to be able to flex to change, with those changes in the delivery.
Embraer has been a great partner of ours in terms of just meeting the needs that we have from a sales department.
Of all of our OEM partners, they're certainly one of the best at listening to NetJets, understanding our specific needs, the specific needs of our owners and our customers, and then doing whatever they can to build those back into the relationship that we have.
Before it leaves Melbourne, after the acceptance flight, everything's good. Then there's a bunch of all the squawks. Our guys get with their guys, and they fix them. Then we buy the airplane. So when it gets to Lincoln, they have to tear the galley apart and put the outlet and connect the wires, and then they do the Wi-Fi in Lincoln.
We pull into Lincoln, and there's our airplane that we're supposed to be taking across the Atlantic to Portugal. And obviously you're thrilled to see it, but you're suspicious of it. It's a brand new airplane. You're getting ready to take it on a mission that's going to be, pretty much pushing its performance and range to the limits. You want to be very careful with logbook reviews, with the walk-around inspections on the airplanes. In fact, you find yourself doing it not once, but 2 times, maybe even 3 times.
First off, I'm thinking of paperwork, permits, make sure everything's set up, the weight and balance has to be verified.
Once you leave the United States, every country requires different landing requirements. You got to have prior permission to land, and you also have to have a permit from the Civil Aviation Authority to operate into the country that we're landing in. You got to submit all the aircraft documents such as aircraft insurance, noise certification, crew documentation. You got to show that this person's a legitimate crew member. They don't just let anybody come in. You got to prove that you're worthy to pretty much come into their country and land, and you're going to be safe doing it.
The biggest thing is the planning for the crossing. When you're out there flying, you're not in radar contact. You're on your own.
The smaller aircraft don't have the range that the larger aircraft have, and they also don't have the equipment because they're not built to do that. You don't have the long-range navigation on board the aircraft. You don't have the dual HF radios that you need to do transatlantic crossings. We can't just go straight across like this perfect straight line from New York over to Europe. We've got to kind of find a different way around where we can use some more ground-based navigation, where we can stay in radar contact with ATC, and we also can use our radios that we have on board the aircraft. And there are routes that do that. They're called the Blue Spruce routes. They've used them all the way back since World War II. The reason they're called Blue Spruce is they overfly the Blue Spruce forests up in northern Canada, northeastern Canada, because as you're going up towards Goose Bay, and then you head out towards Greenland, over to Iceland, and then down towards Shannon, Ireland, without heading into transatlantic oceanic airspace.
I think the big difference between international and domestic is you've got to think a little bit more about the transit, especially in the over-water portions, because you have many fewer options. You've really got to be thinking in terms of anything from a medical emergency to the weather going down to below minimums, or some sort of problem with the aircraft, and where am I going to take it, and how long am I going to need to get the aircraft there.
For a career pilot, the pre-flight hours are a routine experience of paperwork and inspections. But this flight is not routine. This is not a local commute between states or a simple maintenance ferry. This is a transatlantic flight of over 5,000 miles, over 5 countries, with the majority of the flight out of the safety and security of radar contact. The scrutiny of Rick and Mace's pre-flight inspection and their ability to deal with unpredictable weather and flying conditions will be put to the test. Precise fuel and cargo loading is critical. The pre-flight inspection must be thorough and by the checklist. The avionics software is brand new, and if it malfunctions upon entering the flight plan, the flight will be delayed. The software works, and the flight plan is successfully loaded. With all pre-flight checklists complete, the crew initiates the engine start procedure.
First leg was from Lincoln, Nebraska, and we had to take it to Bangor, Maine in order to clear customs. Every flight is different. I mean, I think most people who are not in aviation judge whether or not they had a successful flight by how smooth the landing was.
Detailed preparations and good training paid off, resulting in an on-time departure from Lincoln, Nebraska to Bangor, Maine.
Every flight is different. It could be a short trip in a busy terminal area. It could be a long trip in a remote area. You could be dealing with weather situations. You could be dealing with mechanical issues. You're just expected to cope with that, and as a professional, do your best and make a good landing.
100.
The landing phase of the flight is the most critical and demands the most concentration from the pilots. With clearance to land, airspeed and descent rate stable, the Phenom makes a graceful landing on the runway. In Bangor, Maine, the Phenom 300 is refueled before continuing on to Goose Bay, its last stop in North America before crossing the Atlantic Ocean. The line personnel connect a ground power unit to keep the systems online while the engine is off. While the refueling process continues, Mace copies the clearance and weather for the next leg of the trip. Despite this stop being short, known as a quick turn, the pilots still inspect the aircraft once again before departing. With the pre-flight checklist complete, clearance received, and the avionics programmed, the crew departs Bangor, Maine for the more remote airport of Goose Bay, and the excitement of an international journey sets in. While en route to Goose Bay, the weather deteriorates. With visible moisture and cold temperatures, the possibility of ice forming on the aircraft becomes a concern for the crew. But the Phenom is equipped to handle icing conditions.
When we landed, it was about a 300-foot ceiling. We had fairly good viz, but moderate rain.
It was raining and cold. Not like the last time, though. Last time I was through there, it was -2 wind chill. But this time, it was raining. I don't know, it was probably 300 overcast and good visibility underneath. Like Mace says, those kind of approaches you live for. The rain maybe wasn't the big deal. The lower ceilings does get low enough where we're going to go and what are we going to do was not an issue, other than when we got down and got outside, it was cold and wet.
In 1943, Goose Bay was the busiest airport in the world. But more than 7 decades later, visitors to the airport are far less frequent.
And then there was the trip to the hotel. We had put in a pretty long day. The hotel is a pretty Spartan affair. Built out of metal. I mean, you knew that there wasn't going to be a mini bar or a chocolate mint on your bed every night, but it was efficient. And now the anticipation's really building because you know the next morning you're going to get up and you're going to head out across the Atlantic.
The following day, the crew arrives back at the airport to prepare for the next leg of the flight, only to be met with the same cloudy and wet conditions from the day before. Conditions that would dampen everything but their spirits as they continue their journey.
Sierra Papa Hotel, Hotel Goose. You'll be unable 330. You're crossing all the inbound tracks there this morning. It'll be flight level 290. And what will be your speed at that altitude?
The first unexpected event of the trip Air traffic control denies Rick and Mace of their anticipated altitude due to heavy traffic. Rick contacts dispatch and requests a new release reflecting the new altitude and resulting fuel burn for the flight.
When you fly in the North Atlantic region, there are various routes of flight that are standardized. They call them tracks. The volume flying internationally with all the airlines out there, it's very busy. And there's only so many aircraft you can fit in this organized track system.
There's about 5 or 6 tracks. They call the A tracks and the Z tracks, depending on which direction you're heading. And there's specific time frames each day that those tracks are valid from. And the altitudes on these tracks are from about 29,000 feet to 40,000 feet, which for the most part is airline traffic, cargo traffic. When you're starting to talk about private aviation, most of the time we're lucky, we have smaller aircraft, we can fly above it. If you're not so lucky and you get stuck in the tracks, well, you have to be on a specific track following the other aircraft. Right before you're ready to head onto the track system, you got to get an oceanic track clearance because you're going into an area that's not covered by radar. So the only thing they have is position reporting from the pilots. So as the pilot's getting ready to head out onto the track system, they're going to tell them where they're at, what track they're going to be on, their altitude that they're going to be on, and the speed that they're on. So that allows air traffic control to be able to plot on their charts where these aircraft are, how fast they're going. They don't have the luxury of looking at radar and seeing where you're at. So if you're on a tight flight plan and they say, well, you're going to have to fly at 34,000 feet, we just don't have space for you up there. Uh-oh.
If the crew calls us and says, I have to be filed at this lower altitude, number one, we have to see what that's going to do to our fuel burn. It's going to change our fuel burn because the lower you fly, generally, the more fuel you're going to burn. So that's a huge game changer. It could force a fuel stop. It could make us fly a lot slower to stretch the fuel that we do have.
If you have to slow the aircraft down to save on fuel, you might run into crew duty issues. Crew can only fly for so long each day for safety reasons. If you're able to fly above the tracks, which would be usually above 40,000 feet, you basically can go anywhere you want.
Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel to the Keflavik Airport via the Goose Bay 2. Direct hoist, direct 5850 west.
With coordination between dispatch and air traffic control, they were granted a higher altitude, resulting in better fuel efficiency to Iceland.
Expect flight level 410, speed Mach 0.70, 202. Reback. Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel, contact Gander Center 120.4 as soon as you're airborne. The winds are calm, clear for takeoff, runway 08, complete.
With the clearance obtained and everything entered into the flight management system, the crew begins their taxi to the runway.
Runway is confirmed. Runway 8 confirmed. Power is set. 70. V1, rotate. Positive rate. You're up, please.
We took off out of Goose Bay. We were almost in the clouds immediately. Climbed out, got on top, but there was a solid undercast layer.
Papa Hotel for hire, contact Gander Center 9113342. Have a good day.
13342, good day. Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel. Center, Phenom, Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel. Climbing through 14,000 for flight level 280.
Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel, Gander Center, good day. Climb, flight level 410.
Climb flight level 410, Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel.
As the crew travels closer to Greenland, it begins to sink in just how far from home they are. Settlements are few and far between, with only one suitable airport available for landing in case of an emergency. The airport is known as Narsarsuaq, located on the southern tip of Greenland.
Narsarsuaq was codenamed Bluey West 1 during the Second World War. That's where a lot of our transports would fly into, and it's a very difficult, very challenging approach to make. We're about 125 miles, I guess, west of Greenland. The undercast just disappeared, and we were in just brilliant blue sunshine with perfect VFR conditions. We got to experience seeing Greenland, just bathed in beautiful sunlight.
The glaciers, the iceberg at 40-some thousand feet, it's cold down there. There's hardly anybody down there. Very few people in the whole world have seen that.
It's just otherworldly. It's one of those few spots on the planet where it's just etched into your memory when you see it for the first time. So one of our position reports was over the very southern tip of Greenland.
You're not in radar for most of the way, just a little bit of time leaving Goose and then a little bit of time prior to getting to Keflavik.
And not only is it to be finally orchestrated with the air traffic controllers, but there's a separate division of individuals who speak on what we call a high-frequency radio. They're radio telephone operators, and they're located in certain parts of the world. And you're talking to someone on the other side of an HF radio who picks up the phone and talks to the controller about you. The controller tells the HF radio person what you're to do, and then they talk to you in the airplane.
There are mandatory position reporting points that you have to make a position report, and you have to estimate your next time, when you're going to be at the next point. If it varies more than 3 minutes, you have to call them and let them know, so they know, when you're going to be at the next point. And if you're not there, then they start looking for you.
So you can imagine in a non-radar environment, if you've got two aircraft on the same track and they're off by their estimate by 3 minutes, and they get there 3 minutes later than they anticipate, and the trailing aircraft is 3 minutes ahead of schedule, then you've closed that gap by as much as 6 minutes, which when you're doing 7 miles a minute, you're looking at 40-something miles of spacing that's just eroded. So it's very important that the accuracy of those reports is maintained. It's really important that people are vigilant about where the aircraft is and maintaining awareness.
Gander Radio, Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel, Charlie, position.
Papa Hotel, Charlie, Gander Radio, go ahead.
Papa Hotel, Charlie, Oscar Zulu, November at 1151 Zulu, flight level 410, estimating north 61, west 040 at 1207Z, north 63, west 030, next, over.
Copied, all okay. I understand you are negative HF equipped. You should be in range this frequency, but we're having some trouble with these northerly VHF frequencies. They're working on maintenance today for 134.47 as well as this frequency. So if you're unable to transmit your 40 west, can you kindly do it through air-to-air, through guard frequency on HF? Go ahead.
It's almost like going back into time, going back into the 1950s when radar didn't exist and we relied on position reporting. So that's pretty much the state of the art in the Atlantic crossing today, which I find kind of amusing given the proliferation of satellites and communications and all that we're still back in that 1950s mindset.
There were several times, when you're flying on those routes and you're looking down at from 43 or 45,000 feet, and you're looking down at these icebergs, and you can see them. So they're huge. Could you imagine flying over the Atlantic Ocean in a single-engine airplane with not even being able to see out really outside the front of the airplane and filled with fuel, and for hours and hours and hours of nothing?
First few times you go over the tracks, you're thinking the Lindbergh, how did he even manage to get where he was going?
Anytime you are flying remote airspace, there's three major criteria we're always looking at. Medical emergencies, one engine out, so if you lose an engine, where are you going to go, what are you going to do? And then rapid depressurization. In those remote areas, you have to think about those things. When you have a smaller aircraft, you have a lot less fuel to work with. So where are you going to go? And those airports that you choose have to have many different requirements. They got to meet weather requirements. We're also looking at firefighting equipment. So those blue spruce routes allow us to go in an area that not only has places for us to use as our tech stops along the way, but they also have other airports along the way that allow us to use as diversion points if we should run into an emergency.
Once you commit to making a descent into Iceland, you're pretty much landing in Iceland because of the range limitations.
Keflavik Tower, Charlie Sierra Papa Hotel, ILS 11.
Charlie Sierra Papa Hotel, Keflavik Tower, good afternoon, continue number 1, runway 11.
Continue number 1 to runway 11, Charlie Sierra Papa Hotel.
Decent weather conditions make for a smooth approach into Keflavik, Iceland. Iceland is known for having some of the most scenic vistas in the world.
We're getting ready to head down to Ireland, Shannon, Ireland, where it'll be green and rainy and windy.
After clearing customs, the crew prepares for the next leg of the flight. With the walk-around complete, the line crew bids farewell as the Phenom heads back to the skies.
Charlie Hotel, initially flying 190 until advised by approach. The wind is 2608, wind air 119.3, runway 29 cleared for takeoff.
At heading 190, 119.3 and airborne and clear for takeoff. Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel.
Clear for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff.
Power coming up. Power set.
Photographer, contact Reykjavik Tower 80, bye-bye.
Contact Reykjavik Tower 860, Fox Paco 2, bye-bye.
3-1, rotate. Positive way.
Gear up, please.
Flap 0. Flap 0 selected.
After takeoff checklist.
Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel, approach. Clear, direct, Oscar.
We were in radar contact the whole way. We had to go to an intersection called, I believe it's Ratsu. If you don't have HF radio, you have to go over that. For me, the female Irish controllers, the pitch and the accent, it's just different. You're not used to it.
Even though they speak English, seems to be the most difficult to understand.
Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel, Charlie, good day, identified 40 miles northeast of Shannon. Maintain flight level 80 on reaching. Further descent in 2 minutes.
Every time I go through Ireland, it's, what do they say? What was that?
What'd he say? What'd she say?
What did he say?
It's the accents. On both of my trips, the other pilots had a tough time with the Irish controllers, whereas I didn't have a problem at all. It was the French controllers I couldn't understand.
The controllers are expecting that level of proficiency from everybody. So you don't want to be the one that sounds like a buffoon on the radio. You don't want to be the one that sounds like they don't know what they're doing. So preparation's really key.
Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel, Charlie 8 is Tango is current. QNH 1006 hectopascal.
Charlie Sierra, Papa Hotel, Charlie Tower, good. The surface wind 250 degrees, 11 knots, runway 24, clear to land.
I think the thing that impresses you when you see Ireland was the greenness.
It's green. Ireland is green.
And then these brilliant blue skies with these large puffy white clouds, and it was pretty intriguing. Getting in closer to Shannon, there was a small squall line which was coming across the field.
Approach is saying there's rain there and they're getting gusts up to 32, and we can still see the airport. Mace did a good job briefing what we're going to do, and it would clear over to the right.
We have procedures for all that. We briefed for the potential go-around due to wind shear. We took a good look at the weather. We landed, and unbeknownst to us, we had just flown through this perfectly formed rainbow.
It didn't surprise me. In Ireland, it seems like it's always raining somewhere. The rainbow was different. I didn't even think about the rainbow at the time. We probably could have looked over to the left and seen the rainbow too, but we were busy with other things.
I walk down the steps and I see just this perfect rainbow that had formed over the airport. So I quickly grabbed the camera, and as one pilot pointed out to me, rather than there being a pot of gold at the end of it, there was a fuel truck.
The next morning, the crew arrives back at the airport to embark upon the final leg of their journey. For the crew, the last leg of the flight is bittersweet, while the excitement of the journey will soon be coming to a close.
Rick is a professional, very calm demeanor, has a wonderful sense of humor.
Mace is just a very good pilot, good guy, perfectionist, which is a good thing for a pilot to be. He wants to do the right thing when nobody's looking.
When we're dealing with the airplane and the cockpit and duties, and there's absolutely no ego there.
In the end, pilots rely on one another to get home safely. It's this brotherhood that truly makes the journey more valuable than the destination.
I would say the bond the pilots have with each other is the respect for the complex task they do, and how amazing it is the professionalism at which they do it. It's not easy.
As the crew departs for their final leg to Cascais, Portugal, they reflect upon the miles of sky they covered to get here. Over 1,300 miles from Lincoln to Bangor, 600 miles from Bangor to Goose Bay, another 1,400 miles from Goose Bay to Keflavik, and over 800 miles from Keflavik to Shannon. And now, their final leg of 840 miles from Shannon to Cascais, Portugal. In total, their journey took them over 5,000 nautical miles.
We took off, came across the Bay of Biscayne, got handed off from the French controllers to the Spanish controllers, and then handed over to the Portuguese controllers.
This control, Jordanian 262, good morning, 390.
Jordanian 262, good morning. Maintain 390, direct T3.
Cascais is kind of a unique airport. It's not too far from the water, so you're going to get the marine layer.
It's almost very San Francisco-like. Cold water, you get warm land, you get these marine layers that come in. It's close to the coast on one hand, but on the other hand, there's mountains to the north. There's a big note on the approach chart that says if the winds are out of the north more than 10 miles an hour, you can expect moderate wind shear.
When you have winds coming out of the north over the hill, they kind of swirl. So then it got pretty gusty, and we bounced around and just put it down and stopped it.
I think we stopped the thing at about 1,300 or 1,400 feet and made the turn off onto the ramp, and there were about 6 NetJets Europe employees waiting for us. So it was a nice welcome.
Mission accomplished. We were 2 minutes late from when we had planned on landing.
We spent 3 months in planning for this trip, and the organization and support that we got from both NetJets and NetJets Europe on all levels, dispatch, meteorology, etc., was superlative.
We had help from NetJets here in Columbus. We had help with NetJets in Lisbon. If we wouldn't have had the help, it would have never happened.
Global efforts between teams at NetJets North America and NetJets Europe provided the pilots with the support they needed to complete their journey safely.
We're a very tight-knit group here. None of us will ever let anybody come in here and force us to compromise anything when it comes to safety and service. We realize how important that is.
You have to get it right, and there is no second chance in some of these environments, and so we work very, very hard to make sure we get it right every single time.
We're very good at the day-to-day, right? It's like a big machine, right? You're going from here to there, and this is your day, and this is what you're doing, and this is what we do every day. As soon as you step outside of that, as soon as you say, I'm taking a Phenom to Europe, that falls outside of the machine.
2 pilots strengthened their bond in the sky, and the Phenom 300 was delivered to its new home across the globe, ready to take its next passengers on another unforgettable adventure.
The crossings, while challenging, are very rewarding.
I'll remember Lisbon for the rest of my life just because of the scenery. It's like a postcard.
It's almost like being able to get in the family car and suddenly you find yourself in Ireland, and to be able to enjoy both the trip, which we don't on airlines. We sort of suffer through the trip to get to the destination that we want to get to.
Looking at this from a filmmaker's point of view, this was an incredible trip. We captured amazing footage all throughout the journey, and it's a trip that I'm always going to remember.
This experience of taking this first Phenom delivery into Europe was really fun to see, and I think a lot of our customers, even those who have been flying with us for decades, will be excited to learn that everything that they love about NetJets here in the US is available to them in Europe.